guys, welcome back to another episode of E&Ftv. Today we are joined by James Cannon, who is the Sales and Marketing Director at Guestline. James, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's my absolute pleasure. Thanks for the introduction. Thanks for having me on, Tom.
No, it's great to get you on the show because obviously we've spoken on a number of occasions now on the upcoming to this, and I've been really excited about it because from a few of the conversations we're actually going to be touching on a few hobbies of yours that have some really great correlation with what we're going to be talking about today, which is going to be really interesting. But just before we get into the episode, guys, I just want to remind everybody, don't forget to head over to the YouTube channel, make sure you're subscribed, and make sure you're sharing the episodes with other people within your network. We've got nearly 80 episodes now, and of course, this is going to be a fantastic one with James today. So as I say, make sure you head over to the YouTube channel, make sure you're subscribed, but let's kick it off. So James, as I say, with any episode, on all episodes, we always like to find out who the guest is, a bit about you, your background, and of course, what your current role is now. So take it away.
Fantastic. Thanks again, Tom. So as you said in your intro, I'm the Sales and Marketing Director at Guestline. So I suppose the first place to start is I didn't start my career in hospitality. I didn't start my career in sales, and I didn't start my career in marketing. So I'll sort of take you through an abridged version of how it is that I ended up here. I actually started in retail. I spent 10 years working in an IT department of a big retailer who had 600 stores across the UK. I'm going to show my age. This is sort of going back to the late 90s. And we were using some pretty innovative technology then, thin client technology, which was kind of a stepping stone to cloud technology that we see today. So very passionate about technology, always have been, and integrated technology. And one other little thing to mention, I had the pleasure of working with a couple of guys who started a business out of a garage in Canada. And again, we're going back many, many years now. And they came up with this idea called U-Scan, which was an idea that they came up with after being at the supermarket, standing in a queue and thinking, surely there's a better way of this sort of checkout experience.
Yeah.
Fast forward, they were the sort of pioneers of self-service checkouts. And I was involved in the project to implement the first self-service checkouts in the UK, and we've all seen how ubiquitous the sort of self-check-in, checkout process has become. So that was where I started out. I then got an invitation to go and join what was Micros Fidelio at the time as a project manager. They were looking for somebody to manage their first deployments of hosted property management services for clients in the UK. I came with a project management background and an IT background, as I've said. So I was with them for a number of years. In 2010, I think it was, Micros wanted to set up a sales division that would focus on the SME market. So they'd been, obviously not been, but are very successful in the big international brands, not so much in SME. And they asked me to form a team. The reason that is sort of a milestone in my career is it was my first exposure to working with the independent hoteliers, and it's something I fell in love with, and I still have a huge passion for today, which is part of the reason I am where I am.
Yeah.
There was one more step along the way. I worked for a company called Quadriga, again another hospitality technology provider. Different though, they were focused on sort of Wi-Fi, in-room entertainment, networking, and I was managing the UK, NIS, Russia, Nordic, so quite a large region. And then one day I got a phone call from an ex-colleague who had worked with at Micros, who was then at Guestline, and he said, we've got an exciting role. We've been very successful growing Guestline in the UK, and we now want to, I think his words were, get off the island, which was another way of saying we want to go international. And he saw that I had quite a lot of experience working in some international markets. He knew me from old, so he invited me to come over and work here. That was nearly 4 years ago. I'm now, as you said, Sales and Marketing Director for globally here at Guestline. And this is an absolute cliche, but this is one of those, when you do a job you love so much, it no longer feels like a job. And that is sincerely how I feel about this. So I feel very lucky and privileged.
No, fantastic. Yeah.
In my spare time, I think you're going to come on to this. I like a lot of cycling. So I do quite a bit of road cycling. But the thing that people tend to be a little bit interested in is actually I have my private pilot's license as well. It was one of those things on my bucket list. And when I turned 40, I thought, right, just go and get my pilot's license. So I've had that for a few years, I'm going to say, without giving my age away completely.
Fantastic, fantastic. And what an incredible hobby to have. I mean, just before we get into it, how did this come about? Was it a friend? Did you see something online?
Well,
What was it?
no, look, those of a certain age will remember when Top Gun, the film, came out, which was a propaganda film to to get recruits into the US Navy. So look, I was a fan of
Sure.
Top Gun. Actually, when I was at school, I thought, yeah, I'm going to go and join the RAF. I didn't, took a different path, but I always, ever since had that thing in my back of my mind. I wanted my pilot's license. I wanted to fly. So as I said, when I got to the age of 40, I thought, come on, let's, I actually lived pretty close to a fantastic little airfield, went up there, signed up, and the rest, as they say, is history.
Fantastic. Okay, as you say, I wanted to sort of come on to this point, and it brings me on quite nicely, is the similarities between your fantastic hobby. You've actually made some fantastic sort of synergies between piloting, but also managing a hotel. And I suppose, excuse the pun here, but I suppose there's been a lot of turbulent times more recently. But yeah, it'd be great to understand a bit about your perspective on that, because what you've said to me previously, I found really interesting, and it really does sort of work. So yeah, please do tell the audience the synergies and the similarities between piloting and also managing a hotel.
Okay, well, I was asked about this a little while ago, and there are a number of sort of lessons that you can sort of pull on from pilot training and not just hospitality, but kind of running any business. But the one that really stuck out for me was around decision making, because it's something that everybody in in a management position in a hotel or any other business has to do regularly. Is decision making. So let me just tell one story here, if I may. Part of pilot training, there is a course called Human Performance, and it's all about how you behave as a human, as the name would suggest.
Yeah.
But during that, you're encouraged to read air accident reports, learn from other people's mistakes, basically.
Sure.
And there was this one that I read. It was about a plane, 190 or so passengers flying from JFK to Portland. They were on sort of final approach, lowered the landing gear, and normally you'd get three little lights, let's call it on the dashboard, that shows you that your landing gear, three wheels are down successfully, and they only get two lights. So the implication being that one of the landing gear is not down. An hour later, that plane actually crashed in the suburbs of Portland. So you're probably thinking, what on earth has it got to do with decision making or hospitality?
Wow.
So bear with me. Bear with me. So let me just tell you another little story. It was last year, back at the early part of last year. One of my sales team was talking to a prospect, and they had some pretty clear, defined requirements. We showed how we could help them on all the things they wanted to do. But there was this one thing that kept coming up, and it was they had their incumbent system had an interface to their telephone system, so that when a hotel guest made a call, you charged it automatically to the account. We didn't have this interface, and the timelines for the project were pretty tight. So we said, look, we're going to be honest, you won't have this interface for day one. You'll probably be a couple of weeks later. But it was a showstopper. It didn't matter how much we sort of tried to talk to them about the other benefits, or indeed the compromises that they would be making going somewhere else. It was no, this is a showstopper. And indeed, true to their word, they chose someone else. So a couple of weeks after that, we were talking to one of the stakeholders, and it turns out that they'd actually barred outgoing calls from the hotel rooms over a year before they replaced their PMS. So this feature that was critical, that was a showstopper, was actually completely worthless. Now, what we call that in pilot training is an absence of situational awareness. It's when you become so fixated on one thing that you become blinkered. You are unable to process other information. You don't step back and look at the bigger picture. And exactly the same thing happened with that story I was telling you about the plane coming into Portland.
Yeah.
The reason that plane crashed had nothing to do with the landing gear. It ran out of fuel. The three experienced pilots flying that plane spent over an hour fixated on this landing gear light, so much so that they burned through all their fuel and they crashed because they ran out. And on the black box, flight recording, you can even hear the first officer say to the captain, "We're losing the engines, we're running out of fuel." And the reply back is, "Reset the circuit breaker. Let's see if we get three green lights on the undercarriage." And it's that fixation on one thing and a disregard for all other information that can lead to making bad decisions. So you asked me what the lesson is. This is a lesson for anybody making important decisions in business. Be
Yeah.
careful not to
Yeah.
get your head turned by one or two sort of shiny features or one or two things which you think are important. Step back, look at the bigger picture, and you will generally make more informed decisions.
Yeah, and again, as I sort of alluded to before the question, in fact, and it is very relevant, is these decision-making skills or these decision-making opportunities, probably now more than ever, are those stressful things where you're having to look at multiple very difficult situations and having to come up with a very, very strong, I suppose, strong disposition to say, I'm going to make this decision. I'm a leader in this situation and I have to make a decision. It might affect some areas badly, but for the greater good, I suppose we need to get ourselves landed. We need to get on the ground. And I suppose there's been a lot of discussion around, I suppose, decision making, but also innovation when it comes to tech. Innovation when it comes to, I suppose, industry-wide progression, because that has very much been something that we've all been focused on, because it's become a necessity for change, right? It's just become the pandemic has forced us to move quicker than maybe we probably would have done. And I suppose from your perspective, innovation wise, what have you seen? And I suppose with that innovation, has there been lessons learned, or do you feel that we're still stuck in a certain way? Because I really do want to focus more on the positives, but it'd be good to get your opinion on that perspective, I suppose, in terms of that innovation and what you've seen.
I love this question. I'm really, really pleased you asked me this question. And there's two parts to it. There's the question about innovation and there's the question about the lessons learned. So if I can, let me take the innovation piece first.
Sure.
I actually don't think what we've seen over the last year or so is so much an acceleration in innovation of technology. It's an acceleration in the adoption of that technology, because actually this technology has existed either in hospitality or in the sort of broader, travel and tourism industry for for quite a long time. But what we've seen over the last year is that acceleration in adoption. I'll just give two examples. The first one, digital registration. So the ability for a guest to digitally register at a hotel rather than filling out the registration card manually. This is actually something that Guestline has offered our customers for quite a few years, but the uptake was incredibly low. And if I'm honest, we didn't push it. It was one of those things that we had. We really didn't speak about it. And the other one was around cloud technology. Again, cloud technology. Guestline has been offering cloud PMS technology since 2009, since the first, before the first iPad was even released, just to put this in context. And yet, over the last sort of year, we've seen a real acceleration in people sort of moving towards cloud technology to move their management above property. So I guess the question is, why did we see that acceleration over the last year? And I think you alluded to it. Some people say that necessity is the mother of invention, but I would say that necessity is probably the mother of adoption. In the case that we've seen. Again, thinking about this question, if I think back to sort of last year, you can almost sort of map chronologically events that were happening in the industry and the wider community with those either changes in adoption or changes in the relative importance that hotels put on this technology. Again, a couple of examples. The first thing that happened when we went into lockdown, and this wasn't just business, it was me, it was most of us as consumers, we grabbed our bank statement, we looked at all of our outgoing expenditure and thought, what can we cut? Because we were faced with such uncertain times. I did it, most of us did it. Hoteliers did exactly the same thing. And one of the things they looked at was, okay, I'm spending money with multiple different providers. Is there someone out there that can provide me with as much or maybe nearly as much as I'm getting from one provider at a lower cost? Again, we saw a number of hotels coming to us saying, look, we like the breadth of what you can do, and we can recognize that actually by consolidating under one provider, we can perhaps save some costs. So that was a trigger point. Then there was the sort of move to how do we manage from above property. So people were in lockdown, so they weren't physically at the hotels. They had less staff because people were furloughed. So it was, okay, how can we manage from above property without having to sort of do remote connections into multiple servers?
Yes.
And consolidate, job functions. So again, it was that acceleration towards cloud. It's the other really interesting one, and you might have some sort of comment on this, is as hotels looked for alternative revenue streams. The one that we saw a lot of was sort of food takeaway services. They still had the kitchen, they still, they're still able to produce. They did sort of takeaways. Is that something that you've seen from other?
Yeah, it's been one of these things where there's been a combination of seriously looking at ancillary revenue streams, of course, but also value added. We saw a lot of situations where hotels, rather than dumping prices and sort of very much that methodology, they actually just looked at adding value. So creating that guest experience, right? So looking at that guest experience and how that can be enhanced without them having to go down that price dumping scenario, because where does that end? That was just going to be a bottomless pit that just was not going to get out of, and it would have forced the market down a very different route. But I think, you're right. There was a focus, and there very much still is a focus on ancillary revenue. I mean, I've had a couple of people on the show talking about it, and I feel that, there's always this question, though, isn't there? Is why weren't we doing that before? There's a lot of this right now, and I was thinking about this a while ago. I held a meeting a while back, and there was a few industry leaders in this meeting, and they were sort of saying, well, we need to really understand our guest. We need to reevaluate what we've been doing. We need to focus on where we're going to be going from now in terms of our tech solutions, in terms of our total tech stack. They were talking about total revenue management, and then one leader just piped up and said, why haven't we been doing this already? And it's so true. But again, that's why I said at the start of this was that the pandemic, for all of its negatives, then don't get me wrong, I've seen my fair share. We're talking to so many people out in the industry, but my God, we've seen a lot of positives. We've seen a lot of opportunity for, as you obviously say, lessons learned, right? There's been some incredible lessons learned. And opportunity for that positive
is a really
change.
interesting bit.
Yeah. But no, so yes, I'd agree with you, and yes, there is that going on.
Yeah. So and then I guess the next sort of stage was when hotels were thinking about reopening. I think it was the 4th of July that they pretty much reopened in the UK. So then their attention turned to the sort of contactless check-in, check-out, and everything wanted to go, sort of socially distanced and contact-free. So it was, okay, who can we partner with that can give us that contact-free, registration and check-in process?
Yeah.
And so it went on. This is one of those questions I could talk about for a very long time. But I guess just one final thing before I just talk about the lessons learned piece.
Sure.
I don't think we can reflect on the last 12 months, or I can't, without calling out the importance of not just the technology that you choose, but the technology provider that you choose.
Yes.
Ask yourself the question, did that technology provider have to scale back during the crisis? Did they sort of hunker down and go very quiet and even have to lose some of their team, or were they positioned to weather a storm like this? Because unpredictability is inevitable, and if I'm a hotel or any business choosing my technology partners, when you're talking about business critical systems, I think the choice of partner is as important as the choice of technology. So
yes,
that's just one sort of thing that sticks in my mind. The lessons learned bit. I love this question. So the thing with lessons, or the thing with lessons and things that we learn, is we generally forget most of what we learn. This is just fact. Yeah. But the way that you avoid making the same mistakes is you have to relearn the lessons. And the way that you relearn lessons, or one very effective way, is to write down the lesson that you've just learned, which is exactly what they get kids to do at school. So actually write it down. This is not the first time as an industry, we've been through a crisis. We went through it in 2008 with the global economic crisis. And to your point about, the person that you were speaking to recently, and they kind of put their hand up and said, why weren't we doing this before? If I could give one takeaway to hoteliers, and again, any business, give yourself 10-15 minutes right now to write down the lessons you have learned over the last 12 months. Because next time you sit down and strategy plan or growth plan for your business, grab that piece of paper or your note on your phone and reread those lessons, because I guarantee they will fade into sort of distant memory by the time you come to do that. And that's where we don't learn from the past.
Yes.
So
yeah.
write it down.
No, definitely. And anybody that is watching this at this stage, why don't you comment below the lessons learned that you've had? Because we'd love to hear them. Because I think it's going to be relative to everybody, right, James? Like, no matter what, well, obviously industry, but also environment you're working in, the complexities of that environment, it can be massively different. So anybody that is watching this, pop down the lessons that you have learned, or the main ones that you've learned anyway. We'd love to hear them. This is going to be a bit of a challenging one, I think, because obviously you're working within tech. And my next question is very much focused towards tech and that guest experience, and where does tech end? You know, because I think there's an element where, in my opinion, of course, tech is there to bolster and help the people on property to make sure that they can focus on the things they need to focus on, right? But there may be an argument out there where is too much, you know, is there a case of too much tech? And where does it get to a point where it does detract from that guest experience? Or I suppose, are you sort of on the other side of the fence where it's completely opposite? Let's drive more tech and therefore make that guest experience even better. Where does your sort of mindset lie and perspective, I suppose? And again, I know this one is putting you a bit on the spot.
This is one of these, do you want the good news or the bad news type questions. So let's start with the bad news. The bad news is, and this might surprise you to hear me saying this, but yes, absolutely. Too much technology could, of course, detract from the guest experience. I completely agree with that statement. You know, if you think about hospitality, even the word has its origins. I think the origins of the word hospitality are friendliness to guest. You know, it's about that experience. It's about that emotional connection. So of course, technology cannot replace that. So yes, there is a tipping point. The good news, I would say, is it's easy to avoid falling into the trap, and for two reasons. The first is most of the hotels that I talk to, and bearing in mind I'm working in the independent, the SME sector. Most of the hotels that I talk to are sufficiently far away from that tipping point for it not to be a concern. You know, if anything, we are, somewhat conservative as an industry. We are conservative in our adoption of technology. If you compare us to just retail, for example, and it's slightly different, but we are so far away from that tipping point, it need not be something that, you know, that holds us back. And the other thing I would say is there are plenty of companies out there, and I would absolutely include Guestline in this statement, that can help hotels navigate and avoid, that possibly happening. For years, even before I was at Guestline, I've always talked about appropriate technology. Just because you can, it doesn't mean you should. You know, you have to use technology wisely and sensibly. It has to fit the profile of your guest, the profile of your hotel, and what you're ultimately trying to achieve. So, yes, it could, but I think it's easy to avoid. Choose your partner correctly. And as I say, I think we are quite away from that tipping point, so don't worry about it too much.
No, I'd say in terms of that tech element, I think as I say, I don't think we're at that sort of tipping point just yet, but I think that point about it's who you're working with rather than, and what that tech is actually providing. Because I think a lot of people look at tech in a way where they almost look at it as if they're, you get this sort of, and apologies to use this analogy, but you sort of had this sort of feel of certain branding, right? So you look at something like Apple and you immediately think that's quality and they're going to be able to do everything I need them to do. And that's not always necessarily the case. And I think once you start looking at tech providers and you start going, well, I've heard of them, so they must be great. Or I've dealt with them before, they've got to be awesome. When in fact, you can find some fantastic tech solutions, especially now where we've started to see innovation coming from the smaller players, coming from the new kids on the block, right? And there's a lot more opportunity, there's a lot more diversity, but also there's a lot more I suppose opportunity for agility there, because as I say, there's more, let's say, dinosaurs of the tech side of things within hospitality. They've done their job. They are very well established and they are very much not going anywhere. But we've certainly seen an influx or an almost tech revolution in terms of smaller tech sort of solutions that are able to provide something that is innovative, that hasn't been seen before, and it is packaged well. So yeah, I think there's definitely an opportunity to look at who you're working with, because there's so many
I think
options.
you've interviewed a number of the companies that you're talking about. I've watched a number of these episodes, and you've interviewed some absolutely fantastic, relatively new technology companies. I couldn't agree more. If they've got a passion for it, ideally if they're kind of from within the industry and they understand the problems that they're trying to solve, 100%. There's some amazing innovation coming through.
Yeah, it's been really good to see, and as you so rightly said, yes, they have featured on the show, and it's been great to sort of help build that profile, I suppose, and help push that message, because it is so important. But I suppose coming back to you guys, of course, so we've spoken about a number of things that current challenges or synergies between your sort of hobbies and things and managing hotels. But I suppose Guestline, what's going on with you guys? What have you got going on going forward? Any developments, any new projects going on? Because I know from talking to you guys over the years that you're always up to something. So what's going on with you guys at the moment?
Well, again, this is one of those, how long have I got type questions. So, and I'm looking at the clock thinking actually not too long. So I'm going to speak, I'm going to try and keep it really brief. So I guess just to give you an idea directionally where we're going, we've commented on the evolution of the digital guest journey, right? And how the adoption of that has accelerated over the last year. So that is absolutely a focus for Guestline. We look elsewhere in the industry at what lessons we can learn. And if we look at the airline industry and, the people that have really delivered a great digital passenger guest experience, what we see is that it works best when the company that are producing that kind of application also have very, very close management of the other inventory and management systems in the guest journey. What I mean by that is we will continue to build out our own breadth of functionality. That will be our primary focus, to include as much functionality, both breadth and depth, as we possibly can in our solution. Right. That's not to say that we, don't see the value in integrating with some of those companies that we just referred to, some of the innovative startups. We do. We have hundreds of integrations, and I know from my inbox that number just keeps going up every single week. So it's not a we shouldn't integrate, but we absolutely should integrate. We should be best of breed when it comes to that integration and continue to build out our functionality. Aside of that, this whole digital registration, forgive me for using a product name, but Guest Stay, which is one of the products that we have, we're going to continue to build out that. So it really becomes that end-to-end portal for the guest journey, build out the capabilities for hotels to use this to promote sort of ancillary and upsells through the guest journey at appropriate points, while all the time making sure that this is something which guests want to use, not something that is thrust upon them, for the convenience of the business, for the convenience of the hotelier. They've got to want to use it. I looked up a statistic knowing I was coming on here, and in the last couple of weeks since the hotels reopened, more than 35,000 guests have used our online check-in platform to check into hotels. So that's 35,000 guests who would have ordinarily stood at reception and filled out the piece of paper. So it's clearly they want to use it. They're happy to embrace this technology. The time saving alone for hotels is massive. So we're absolutely continuing to build out that. Around payments is another thing which is really being revolutionized across the industry at the moment. We have our own solution. We'll continue to build out our functionality and capability around payments. Reporting and analytics, forgive me for getting a little bit techie, but we've an event-driven architecture within our platform, and that's enabling us to present reporting and visualizations of data that we've never been able to do before. A lot of our hotels have already had that turned on. It's it's just a feature and a function that we're turning on for hotels. We'll continue to do that and build out that. And I guess the other thing to say is, years ago, if I think back to the sort of my time at Microsoft, you built up to a big release of software. You had a version, maybe had one a year or one every 18 months. That's sort of an historic way of working for us. So just in quarter one of this year, again, I looked this up, we released 85 new features or feature improvements into our PMS, and that just gets rolled out iteratively.
Yeah.
It's not a version, it's just a continual improvement. So that will carry on as well.
I was going to say, that's what I mean by you guys just seem to be always up to something. It's not always announced or whatever, but you've always got something going on, which is fantastic to see. And it's great that that's not seeming to slow down anytime soon, which is really great.
Absolutely not. If anything, it's actually getting faster. The more work that we did in, sort of 4 years ago on our underlying architecture, it was all to enable us to go even faster and accelerate the rapid release of new features and functionality. So, our customers are really seeing that coming through.
Fantastic. And again, it's just fantastic to see how much activity there is going on. I think with that comes, a real positive energy and a real positive sort of outlook, which is great. I know for anybody that is watching at this stage, I know I'll pop your details below, James, but I'll also pop it the website link as well. So anybody that does want to understand a little bit more about Guestline, what they provide, I know that James and his team would love to have a conversation with you and see how they might be able to help. So James, I'll pop all the details below. But of course, I just want to say a massive thank you to you, because I know how busy you are.
It's a pleasure.
No, it's been great to get you on the show. So no, thank you very much for your time. It's been great to hear about your background and obviously how you got to where you are now, but also those synergies between, of course, your hobbies and what we discussed in terms of hotel management and the turbulent times that we saw ourselves in. And obviously getting ourselves to that landing point where we can get back to some sort of normality, which is a fantastic thing. So again, thank you so much.